Hello, thank you for joining me. This is Liz Wright from Liz at Home. Today I'm going to be painting along with you this little landscape with some pretty daisies in the front. I'm busy doing a Skillshare class led by the very talented Zaneena Nabeel. She also has an Instagram account and she posts lots of lovely watercolors. I'm so enjoying the Skillshare class. It's 30 watercolors. I don't know if I'll get time to do all of them, but I thought I wanted to repaint this one because we're cutting little pieces of paper and they're little miniature watercolors. And I painted this one with the wrong orientation. The paper should have been that way around. So I thought I'd redo it with you so that you could see, and you might like to try and do the painting along with me. I think it's turned out quite prettily and it's really easy to do. So I'll tell you what materials I'm using. I have 140 GSM watercolor paper. You have to use watercolor paper for this, and 100% cotton is better. Mine is actually not 100% cotton, but it's working fairly well. I have a small size 0 paintbrush, and I have a larger size, no, that's a size 2, plus I have a size 7. These two are Craftamo. This is a Princeton Snap brush. And I've also been using, to make these little grasses, I find them quite tricky. I've been using an interesting, it's also a Princeton Velvet Touch Petals brush to get that very fine tip, but you can do it with your little size 1 or 2 or whatever small size brush you have. I think it probably just needs practice. So I'm using Mission Gold paints, and I'll tell you what colors as I get started. I've also got a large 1-inch black silver brush just to wet the background, to do wet on wet technique. So I'm just going to do a very light pencil sketch to start with. So just above the halfway point, I'm doing the horizon line, and then I'm going to paint in the mountains, the one, and then the other going up there. And then I want this to be a slightly wider mountain at the background with some more interesting things. And then I'm going to do the sky, and to paint the sky I'm going to be using a Winsor Newton Professional Phthalo Turquoise, which is this color. And then I'm also going to be using, just for some clouds, a little bit of Daniel Smith Moon Glow. So I have the paints on my little butcher's tray, and the Phthalo Turquoise is over here. Make sure I've got that, and then this is the Moon Glow. So I'm just going to wet them, and then I have 2 vessels of water, one for clean water and one for rinsing my brush. So I'm just going to wet the sky area with clean water, and then I just want to get close to the mountains. The way to see if it's wet or not is whether it shines on the paper. So today is actually quite warm here and things are drying very quickly. So I'm grateful that the area I'm using is small. So now I also have a paper towel here, and I've affixed my paper to a movable little thing that I often use for my watercolor. So now I just want that to dry a bit, and while that's drying a bit, I'm going to get together my Phthalo Turquoise, wetting my brush, and I want this to be quite a thick paint because I'm doing wet on wet. I don't want this to be too watery because then it kind of travels so much that that it just won't leave room for clouds. So I think that's all right, and I'm just going to dab it a little bit on my paper towel, and then I'm starting with that and leaving little spaces. I want to do all along the top. Do some little spaces there. And there. So with it being wet on wet and this being quite a bright color, I hope it will give some color to the sky, because watercolor always dries sort of much more pale than when you put it on. So now I've rinsed my brush, and I'm going to be using, I also have a wet wipe here. I've been finding that's a good way to get some of the paint off the brushes, because rinse and rinse and rinse in the water and there's always still some color. Which I find quite frustrating. Okay, so now I'm going to use, I've dried my brush off a bit because I don't want this to be too watery. I'm going to use some of this Moon Glow, which is a sort of purpley grey, and just to make a slightly moody sky, to enter the bottom of some of the clouds. And then I'm going to rinse the brush off again and dry it off on the paper towel and just manipulate this a bit so that there we are. And now I'm going to leave that to dry by itself, and I'll be back to do the next layer. It needs to dry completely dry before you go. Well, I left that to dry, and I've just come back to my sky here because I've just redone it. It dried and everything, and then I did a bit of the video doing the mountain, this little grey mountain, and I messed it up. So I've restarted and I've just redone the sky, which now still needs to dry. And I'm going to be doing, while this dries, I'm going to be doing the green grass, this meadow so long. So I'm going to be using this yellow, which is cadmium yellow, and it's a mission gold paint. And I'm just activating it. And of course there was still some blue in my brush, so it's got a slight greenish tinge to it, which is not actually what I wanted. So I will need to just clean that off and start again. And instead of using this bluish water, I'm going to use my clean water. Make sure my brush is completely clean. Try again. That's better. Still got a slightly greenish tinge to it. I suppose there's just blue in the brush no matter what you do. So let me see what happens here. And I'm going to paint the meadow with this lovely fresh yellow color. Well, it looks a bit yellow green, but that's also okay. I'm not very good with painting and filming, I must say. I find myself quite agitated to try to do this. It's ever so much easier just painting without filming. There, that's better. like this color. That's better. Getting the clean color. Sort of half feel as if I should. Something in my brush. Not quite sure what that is. Nice. Get the yellow. I feel as if I need to clean this whole lot up. And start again almost, but I'm going to make green mountains on the top there and one snowy peak. It's a snowy peak that I'm having trouble with. So once we've got halfway down with this nice yellow, fresh yellow, I'm going to use some sap green, which is this color here. Just need to activate it again. And I'm going to just do a few, oh, there's a bit of hard paint. Go along there, and a lovely fresh color. And while the yellow is still wet, I'm just going to do one or two little streaks, and then I'm going to use my small size 1 brush and do a few more green lines in the yellow in the meadow, just so that they're very fine. Oh, there we go. Rinse that off. And now I'm going to mix my sap green with some indigo to make it darker. And I'm going to make the bottom of the meadow a bit darker. There we are. Onto the sap green above there. And then I just want to rinse my brush off nicely and dry it off a bit and just get those to blend a little bit. So now I'm going to, oh, I want this to blend here also. It's traveling a bit much for the effect I wanted. So now that needs to dry, and when the sky is dry and the meadow is dry, I'll be back with the next part. Okay, so now the sky is not actually completely dry. It's not too bad. I'm going to start with the snowy mountain, and I'm going to be using indigo. This is Mission Gold paint. I'm using my small little Princeton size 0 brush with the indigo, and I'm just going to, I want to make some little little lines going down. And then a few more. This is not a great brush. And then more lines going up. I find this part of the painting the most difficult. I wanted this to be a paler grey. Wanted the whole thing to be a paler grey actually. Because the mountains in the distance, so it's supposed to be pale. I'm not doing this quite as I envisaged. Oh dear. If my YouTube channel does nothing else, it should inspire people to realize that you can keep going and keep trying, no matter if you make flops. Okay, so now that's not good. So it's not going to be that snowy of a mountain. I'm dry brushing this down here. And I think what I'm going to do, once this has dried, actually, because I made a mess here, is get some white gouache and go over it. See what happens there. So there we have a grey mountain, not quite the snowy mountain I envisaged. But this is now the second time I'm trying it here, so I'm not going to do a third one. This is going to be it. And what I can do is clean my brush off, get my bigger brush, wet it, and lift some of that color off because this is all a bit too dark for me. Oh, look, that's not so bad. Let's see what happens if I do this. That's actually better. So now I can take this tiny little brush again and get some darker indigo and just try doing, practice some pieces. This is my little practice sheet to try and get thin pieces. There we go, that's better. And then I think what I will do later on, when this is dried, is just do a little bit of white gouache at the top of the mountain to give the snowy effect. That was supposed to be the white of the paper, but that didn't work out. But I think we've done a recovery. Yippee-yay! Now we're going with my sap green for these mountains. I think I'm going to just squeeze a little bit more out here. This is just an inexpensive watercolor paint called Prime or Prime. Oh, now it's broken. The lid has broken. Shows how cheap it is. That's a shame. I'll have to make a plan to close it. I need to get some more of my Mission Gold. There we have. I think we'll make that a better shape. And we're just going to make a nice mountain coming down here. And along here. are. And then we're going to mix a bit of indigo in with this sap green, and we're going back to our small little brush, and we don't want it to be too wet, and we're just going to let me practice lines again, going that way. So we're just going to make it have some lines going down the hill. And some lines going down the hill this way. I want the valley to be a bit green, but away. There we are. And now while this is still a little bit green, a little bit damp, I'm just going to go over that with my brush again. I think that's looking okay. So this is just creating some valleys in the mountain. Got that clean. Need to clean this brush. Want to work. So I wet the brush and then I wiped most of the water off again so that it's just damp, just to tidy up the sides over there, and then it blends in better. So now that that's all dried, I'm using the small size 0 brush. I've sped the video up a little bit because it's going to be too long otherwise. I'm mixing indigo with the sap green, and I'm going to create some little trees along the horizon line. They're very easy to create. Basically, it's just a triangle, and you need to make the color a bit darker than the color behind it so that they stand out. And we'll complete the trees, and I'm making a wee mess here, just excuse me. And then when you do make the trees, when we make the trees, the thing is to try and make sure that they're all different sizes, and sort of try to put them into clumps. So yes, so I smoothed all the mountain behind it with the damp brush as well to create shadows and interest in it, so lights and shades, and then just creating these little trees. And I will be creating shadows for the trees as well so that they look a little bit more realistic. I think this is looking nice and fresh. The yellow ended up looking lovely once it dried. I'm so relieved. I was a little bit worried that it would look dirty because I wasn't very happy, as you know, when I started putting it down. So these trees are far away and small and not too detailed. Just doing a few up on the hillside as well, just to add interest there. And now I've made a slightly paler, I've watered down the sap green and indigo mixture so that it's a bit more pale, and just do an inclined line at each tree to create the reflection, a shadow. And I decided to actually make trees in the little blotch area and give them shadows as well. So that's done, and now I'm using the white. This is a watercolor white, it's not a gouache, but I'm not really mixing it with much water, and I'm mixing some of the sap green into it to create a very pale, thick color. And this is not really the normal way of using watercolors, but I want, because watercolor is a transparent medium, I needed to stand out above the paint below, beneath the meadow. I want these little grasses to stand up. I always find it's useful to just practice a few before I start going. And basically you just create these little slanty lines as thin as you can manage. This for me is a work in progress. Perhaps this time next year I'll have the most fantastic thin lines. We'll wait and see what happens. And just create as many as you feel comfortable with this pale color, and then we brighten the color as well so that we have many different colors all mixing together. So now I'm going to go with some yellow and adding that to adding some of the greeny whitey color and adding yellow to that so that it stands out a bit more and just looks a bit brighter. A butcher's tray is quite useful, I must say, for mixing in. If you happen to have paints of these particular colors, you could use that as well. In this particular painting, I normally use dried watercolors that I've got in a palette with and I've squeezed them out and let them dry, and then I reactivate them with water. But in this painting, because I'm using watercolor a little bit like acrylics, in that I use them fairly thickly. This is what Zaneena taught in the class that I was doing. One needed to squeeze them from the tube to get this result. So now you can see how nicely that's standing out. You'll notice I also off camera used some gouache to make the snowy top to the mountain, and I think that's, after all the problems, ended up looking quite nice. And I hope it encourages you not to give up when something's not working out, so that you can see that you can work at it. And I'm just trying to do the grasses, and once these pale ones are done, I need to now go to a dark color. So I'm mixing indigo with the sap green and getting quite a dark color to do some very thin ones. And you might freak out at the thought of that, but it actually adds depth to the grasses. So one just keeps going with all these different colors, and then we're going to add some pretty little spring flowers on top of this when we're done. All right, so now I've got grasses enough, and I'm adding some more thick white watercolor paint. You could use gouache, and I'm making some very little simple flowers. I'm almost using my paintbrush as a stamp to get the little petal shape. And I go between these slightly bigger ones and ones where I'm just doing almost little dots around a circle, little daisies, just for the little pretty white, fresh little white flowers to stand out in our spring meadow. If you're sitting in the middle of winter, this could cheer you up and make you think of warm weather to come. There's nothing prettier than springtime, is there? I quite like the flowers when I just do little dots around them. And I've decided to do some further up as well, and I think I'll add some grasses behind there as well. Well, now we're nearly at the end. All I need to do is use some of a nice orangey red. I'm going to be using, this is Mission Gold paint again, and this is Vermilion. I've cleaned my butcher's tray, which was looking quite a mess, and I've got a teeny tiny little brush here. So I just want to make the tiniest, so I'm just going to dab it on a paper towel, tiniest of little dots in the center of each little flower, because it brings them to life. It's a bigger one. We are. And then I want to just make sure I've cleaned this nicely. I find the oranges and the reds sort of stain the brush. So now I'm going to go again with my indigo. I'm not actually sure if I want indigo or if I want to mix it with sap green. I think I'm going to mix that with sap green. So I've run out of sap green, so just going to put a tiny little smudge of sap green next to the indigo here, because I'm always mixing those two colors together. This is just to make my sap green a little bit darker. And bring a little bit more indigo into it. There we are. It's a nice dark green. And I want to use that to make the stem. So each one is just from the bottom, I'm just going to do a little curved stem. I find that adding these little stems links the flower to the picture, it roots it. I want to actually do a few more grasses, just a bit longer. I feel as if they need to extend just a little bit more. But I also need to let the picture be done. And there we are. I think we're actually finished. So now, one of the nice moments, well, I enjoy every moment actually about doing watercolor, but I love taking the masking tape off and revealing the finished product. I do hope you've enjoyed doing this with me. Please let me know in the comments. I know I'm not the world's best watercolor painter at all, but the projects I try to do are easy, that I can manage. And if you would like a link to have a month free of Skillshare, I'm not sure if they give you 2 weeks or a month, do let me know. I can get a code for you. But also know that if you do take that up, they always do ask for your bank details, so it's up to you to cancel before they charge you then for a premium subscription. I've been a premium member of Skillshare for, I think I'm into my 2nd or 3rd year now. I have 3 classes that I've uploaded there, and I'm in the process of doing another class. But more than anything, I'm a student at Skillshare. I just love learning and I love doing all the classes. So thanks so much for watching this with me. Thanks for joining me, and have a great and artistic and colourful week. Goodbye now.